Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are tearing through some highly technical source material. Specifically, we're pulling out core concepts directly from the Fortinet Network Security Essentials curriculum for FortiOS 7.6.0.
That's right. And for anyone who's not familiar, the sources we're looking at, they're really designed to make sure engineers get the operational bedrock of Fortinet systems.
Right.
So while we are absolutely not, a cram session for the NSE 4 certification exam,
Definitely not.
the exams themselves are structured around what Fortinet sees as the most critical architectural and operational principles.
So our mission isn't to help you pass a test. It's to give you that strategic understanding of why these specific configurations and features even exist. And the material, it really makes it clear that modern network defense, it relies heavily on three things: centralized control, dynamic performance, and lightning-fast threat intelligence sharing.
It really is a snapshot of how these high-level networking decisions translate into, real-world security enforcement. We're pulling out those strategic nuggets you need to know to be truly informed about this platform.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start right at the edge of the network, connecting the user. Fortinet uses FortiSASE for its cloud-based security, which gives remote workers the same protection they'd get in the office. So the question is, how do these users actually connect securely?
Right. And what's crucial here is that the whole architecture, it favors completely lightweight software-defined access.
Okay.
They explicitly reject any notion of, say, a physical connection or repurposing weird hardware. The sources identify two accepted deployment methods for secure remote access.
And they're both driven by software on the endpoint, I assume. Let's
Yep.
talk about the first one.
The first, and you could argue it's the most robust, is deploying a lightweight endpoint agent right onto the user's device.
FortiClient agent.
Exactly. This piece of software is responsible for setting up and maintaining a secure tunnel to the FortiSASE cloud. It handles all the system traffic, making sure the entire device is protected no matter what application is being used.
That sounds really complete. It's protecting everything from your email client to some, proprietary corporate app.
So what about the second option? Why would you even need an alternative if the agent is so comprehensive?
Well, the second option is more about flexibility. It's for environments where maybe installing a full endpoint agent might be complex or even restricted. This method involves configuring the user's browser with a proxy auto-configuration file, a PACA file.
A PAC file. I see. So the PAC file is basically like a GPS for the browser. It's telling the application, hey, for all web traffic, don't go straight to the internet. You need to forward it all to the FortiSASE proxy nodes first.
Exactly. It just redirects that web traffic for inspection and for security policy enforcement. But notice the distinction.
The agent protects system-wide traffic, but the PAC file configuration is primarily focused on securing web browsing traffic specifically. It's, a targeted approach versus a holistic one.
Which means the choice of deployment really depends on the risk profile of that user and what kind of corporate resources they need to access.
Precisely. If they just need secure web access, a PAC file might be enough. If they need comprehensive, deep-level protection for everything, the agent is the requirement.
Okay, so we've established the delivery mechanism, FortiSASE.
Yeah.
But if threats are changing by the millisecond, how does Fortinet make sure that those cloud services and the firewalls back at headquarters are always operating with the most current intelligence?
Yeah, that responsibility, that falls squarely on the FortiGuard distribution network, or FDN.
FBN.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can think of the FDN as the central nervous system for global threat intelligence. It's this massive distributed infrastructure designed for one thing: delivering critical real-time updates.
And when you say real-time updates, what specifically is being pushed out to all these devices globally?
We're talking about the lifeblood of modern defense. Continuously maintained and distributed files like updated antivirus signatures, new intrusion prevention definitions to stop zero-day exploits.
And web filtering categories, I'd imagine.
And refined web filtering categories, yes. It's the engine that ensures your firewall, whether it's a physical box or a VM in the cloud, gets that do not trust list at the same time as every other Fortinet customer worldwide.
That centralization is so key. I mean, it eliminates the administrative nightmare of trying to manually update threat feeds across maybe hundreds of devices. Without the FDN, your threat intelligence is stale and your network is immediately vulnerable.
Absolutely. The speed and the scale of that distribution network, it fundamentally defines the resilience of the entire platform against modern, fast-moving threats.
So, moving inward from global threat intelligence, let's talk about enforcing policy locally. Before we can block a dangerous website or, say, limit access to a database, the firewall needs to know who it's talking to. How does the system get that identity awareness, moving beyond just an IP address to an actual username?
This takes us right to Fortinet Single Sign-On, or FSSO. And it raises a really important point about identity mapping, especially when users are logging into domain controllers. The FSSO collector agent needs to efficiently learn those logon events. And the source specifies 2 key mechanisms it uses to get this done in a Windows domain environment.
I'm guessing it doesn't just, sniff the traffic. What are the 2 proactive steps?
The first is monitoring the Windows event logs directly on the domain controller itself. When a successful logon happens, that event gets logged, and the FSSO agent can read it and process it.
Okay, that's the passive method.
Right, and the second method is called net API polling.
No, that sounds more proactive. The agent isn't just sitting there waiting for the event log to update.
That's right. With net API polling, the agent is actively querying the domain controller. It's asking who has an active session running right now, and then it associates those users with their current IP addresses. This constant 2-pronged approach logging and polling is vital.
Which means the system can keep a very accurate real-time map of user identity to IP address without bugging the user for a password every time they try to access something new. So the friction is removed for the user, but the audit trail and the policy enforcement stay precise for the administrator.
Exactly. Identity becomes the core piece of the policy, not just the network address.
Okay, so knowing the user's identity through FSSO, that's one half of the battle. The other half is making sure that even authenticated traffic stays, strictly segmented. Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the foundational security posture. If a FortiGate is in its most common net mode, what's the default behavior for traffic trying to pass between 2 different interfaces, say from the guest network to the internal server network?
The default setting is really the bedrock of network security. All interface traffic is just dropped. Unless an administrator explicitly configures a firewall policy to permit it.
And that default denial rule is so essential. Anyone who's managed a complex, older network knows that configuration mistakes can lead to accidental bridges between networks. This setting just prevents that catastrophic oversight. You have to intentionally open the gates.
It ensures a security-first, policy-based control model where every single packet moving between segments is inspected and authorized. There's just no implicit trust between interfaces.
Okay, let's talk inspection. So we've allowed the traffic with a policy, but if it's encrypted, and almost everything is now, from web traffic to SMTPS email, the firewall can't see inside. What profile is required to get that deep content inspection?
To do any deep content inspection on encrypted flows, the security policy has to have the SSL/SSH inspection profile applied. That's a non-negotiable requirement.
Wait, so the firewall has to temporarily become a transparent man in the middle. It intercepts the encrypted traffic, decrypts it, applies all the security checks, and then re-encrypts it before sending it on.
Yeah.
That sounds computationally intensive.
It is, yeah. But it's the only way to make sure the system can apply those critical security controls like antivirus, IPS, and web filtering to traffic that would otherwise be completely opaque. Without that profile, encrypted traffic pretty much bypasses all your content security, leaving you blind to threats hidden inside SMTPS or HTTPS.
So once we've successfully decrypted and inspected that traffic, let's talk specifically about web filtering. What are the 2 supported actions we can take in the common flow-based inspection mode against a prohibited web category?
Right. In flow-based inspection, the firewall processes traffic very, very quickly, often without fully proxying the connection. And because of that speed optimization, the actions are a bit more limited than in proxy mode.
Okay, so what are they?
You can set the category to require authenticate, which forces the user to verify their identity to continue. Or you can set it to monitor, which just logs the activity for auditing and reporting.
So you can verify the user or log what they did. But actions that would require the firewall to hold the connection and rewrite things, like a full redirect, that's generally reserved for the slower, more resource-intensive proxy-based inspection.
Exactly. Flow-based is all about speed and quick security checks, and the actions you can take reflect that focus on minimal delay.
All right, let's zoom out from the single box to the whole infrastructure. Modern networks, they don't operate with one siloed firewall anymore. They use integrated defense. So if you integrate a FortiGate into the broader Fortinet security fabric, linking it with switches, access points, analysis tools, what are the 2 big strategic benefits you immediately unlock?
The security fabric, it fundamentally shifts the platform from just a collection of separate security boxes to a single integrated systemic defense. The two major benefits are, first, getting centralized visibility of the network topology and all the connected endpoints. This goes way beyond just seeing firewall logs. It's situational awareness across the entire digital infrastructure from one place.
Okay, but if I already have a log server, why is that centralized visibility the key insight? Is it the actionable integration that's the real benefit, not just the single pane of glass?
That leads directly into the second benefit, the automated sharing of threat intelligence between all the fabric members.
Ah, okay.
So if a FortiSwitch detects a suspicious device, that information is instantly shared with the FortiGate, which can then enforce a quarantine policy, and with the FortiAnalyzer, which archives the event. It's rapid, coordinated security enforcement.
And that capability for automated sharing means the response time to a threat just shrinks dramatically. You're not relying on a human administrator to manually copy and paste threat info across all their security devices.
It creates a true self-defending network ecosystem. It really does.
Speaking of dynamic systems, let's pivot from security coordination to performance optimization with SD-WAN. We're trying to avoid the pitfalls of latency, jitter, packet loss for critical applications. So what is the core job of an SLA strategy inside an SD-WAN role?
The SLA strategy is basically the brain of the optimization engine. Its primary purpose is to select the best available path dynamically based on real-time quality metrics. It's not just about using the fastest road. It's more like Waze constantly rerouting your critical application based on real-time traffic jams, latency, jitter, and packet loss to make sure you're hitting your performance targets.
So it's constantly probing and measuring all the available links to make sure your voice or video traffic never suffers from a brownout, just because the primary link is having a small but significant packet loss event.
Precisely. It lets the FortiGate ensure that mission-critical apps always use the highest performing link available at that exact moment. It provides application awareness that directly informs routing decisions.
Resilience is just as important as dynamic performance, though. When we set up a high availability cluster in active-passive mode to ensure rapid failover if the primary device drops, what are the two core supported features that keep that cluster stable and ready to switch?
In active-passive HA, there are two critical features that maintain system resilience and consistency. First, the configuration settings are automatically synchronized between the cluster members. Anyone who's managed a complex cluster knows that config drift is the ultimate danger, and this synchronization makes sure the passive unit is always an exact, ready-to-use mirror of the active one.
That automatic synchronization isn't just a feature, it's a mandatory administrative safety net. What's the second piece?
The second component is the reliance on dedicated heartbeat interfaces. These are physical connections used only to monitor the health and status of the active member. This dedicated monitoring channel enables rapid and reliable failure detection, which allows for the, virtually instant promotion of the passive unit to active when that health check fails.
And it's important to clarify, because it's active-passive, all members are not processing traffic at the same time. The passive unit is purely on standby, synchronized, and constantly listening to that heartbeat, ready to take over the moment the primary fails.
Correct. The focus there is on continuity and reliability above all else.
Okay, finally, let's bring it back to a fundamental requirement for secure connectivity. Moving away from HA and back to remote access. Setting up an IPsec VPN tunnel with a pre-shared key. What is the non-negotiable requirement for that tunnel to successfully come up?
This is foundational security, really. The absolute requirement for an IPsec VPN tunnel using a pre-shared key is total consistency. Both devices must have the exact same pre-shared key configured. Any mismatch, even a single capitalization error, will cause the authentication process to fail during the initial Phase 1 negotiation. The tunnel simply will not come up.
So consistency isn't just preferred, it is mandatory for that cryptographic negotiation to even begin.
Mandatory, yes. It's step one in building that encrypted, trusted channel.
We've covered a massive amount of critical ground today, from browser pick files to dedicated HA heartbeats. Hopefully you now have a rock-solid strategic understanding of these core principles. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.